Hey, it's Luke from Out of Darts. Today we are checking out a really cool production injection molded sidearm. And who doesn't like a sidearm? Let's get going. This is the ZWQ S200 Fire Rat. This unit was dropped off by Chris, a customer of ours. Thank you very much for letting me check this out. We have been speaking with Monkey Mods about carrying these as well because I think they're a pretty interesting offering. But it was nice to be able to get my hands on this earlier since he had already ordered one himself. This blaster feels very familiar in a couple of different ways. It feels somewhat similar to a Dart Zone Pro Mk-II. It also feels very similar to other community blasters. In the back here, the actual feeding mechanism and air turnaround is very similar to a Lynx. But there's obviously been a lot of independent design work, and this is far from being a direct clone in my opinion, especially since there are only so many ways to make a blaster. Ergonomically, the blaster is extremely comfortable. It is probably the most comfortable through grip I have ever felt. Now, it is using one little trick to get to that point, and that is the magazine itself. This magazine is not an angled talon magazine. The magazine itself is 12 rounds. It feels a bit flimsier and lighter weight than most of the magazines we've become used to, such as the Tachi or the Talon mags. However, I don't say that as a fault. It is a feature ultimately because it needs the thinner walls and thinner profile to fit in this grip, to keep this grip very comfortable and small. The grip itself has a rubberized cover on it, much like the Worker Phoenix 2.0. Now this brings me to another point. Apparently these are designed by the same designer, and I can definitely see that. Both the shapes, the sort of effects that are on the blaster, and the styling feel like they could very easily be the same designer, and they're kind of a good complement for one another, actually. Up top, we've got really nice fiber optic sights that pull in daylight. It's got a nice feel, and it's definitely an easy blaster to actually aim. The trigger itself is actually metal, which is a spectacular addition to what is essentially a stock blaster. Do we call these stock blasters anymore? I'm really starting to wonder. That's a whole other conversation for probably another day. I've also been told that there are metal magazines on the way, so that would feel more like an airsoft magazine in terms of build quality, and perhaps reduce the sort of like cheap feel this has. And again, I'm not saying that as a degrading factor. I get that the walls can only be so thick if you're trying to achieve the small mag well, and I do think that's the right direction for this, even though it doesn't use the magazines that my existing blasters have. I just find that the full-size angled talons going through a grip, it's really just not quite as comfortable. It's a lot larger, and it works really well in this form factor where the blaster is physically so much bigger. I have no problem with this grip. I feel it's just fantastic. But when you move down to a sidearm, it's nice to slim that up. I think he's managed to cut about 5 or 6 millimeters off of this direction and a few off of this direction as well. So take that as you will. The blaster operation is quite simple. You've got a prime, a spring-loaded slide return, which I really, really like, and then you fire. It is very easy to rail off as I punch myself in the face. It's a very easy blaster to use. You simply prime, fire, and if you want, you can even double load it. The performance is not super high. It's right around 100 FPS, but this slide is so easy to prime. You can do it with 2 fingers. I expect there's room to actually upgrade the spring itself. However, I'm not aware of how well the internals can take the upgrades. Looking inside, from what I can see without taking the blaster apart, it's clear that there is a metal plunger tube and a few other metal components. I believe there are some aftermarket components available as well. It's a very compact, very comfortable, lightweight blaster. I think it is a perfect complement as a sidearm for a variety of game types. The accuracy, given the shorter barrel length, is definitely not on par with a higher FPS blaster, but given that it's a sidearm and a very small form factor, I think that's pretty forgivable. The mag release feels very good on the side. It's a single button. It does not look to be ambidextrous. However, it does look like these. Nope, it's definitely not ambidextrous. I thought for a second that maybe you could swap these two parts, but I'm looking at the holes, they don't line up. So it's really only easy for a right-handed person. If you're left-handed, you're gonna find this a little bit obnoxious. Sorry for the 10% of people that are left-handed, that's kind of a bummer. I do see why they did it this way. It's just difficult to design ambidextrous things when you're really trying to keep your blaster profile small. One very odd note for me is that this top slide has a very odd design. First, we've got these two pins here, which in theory clamp in and keep the slide in position. However, if I push them in, they do keep the slide there, and when they spring open and the slide can move, they don't seem to work very well. And what I mean there is, if I just fire once, and I'm not going to touch those two pins, I'm just going to prime, I can prime normally without them. I don't really know why they're there. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me because you naturally can grab them, they're not really a problem, but we have heard of users just taking them out completely because they don't seem to do anything. And even if I clamp them, if I pre-press them in place first and then I pull the top, it still fires. So I'm not entirely sure what the thought was there. Perhaps they didn't initially have a return spring, but I really like the return spring. It's nice to just grab it while you're out playing. Oh, that time I didn't. Next feature, the slide stays open when your magazine is empty. Really, really cool. What's happening there is that when the magazine itself is empty, we've got a wall here on the pusher for the mag that will actually collide with the blaster finishing to prime. So very much like a real firearm, we see it stays in the locked open position and lets you know immediately that you can't fire it again, which when you're actually playing with it is an excellent, excellent feature. A few notes on the magazine itself. It is definitely a little bit finicky to reload. You sort of need to be careful because it's an angled magazine, and because the spacing inside is shorter in this direction than most magazines, it's a little bit more work to load this. You're not going to load this super quickly on the fly. Obviously, you can get better over time. I think I found when playing around with this, just 2 fingers, pulling down both and try to center them as best possible. But they really, once they're in here, they only have about a millimeter and a half of play between the front wall and the back wall of the magazine. It's not terrible once you get used to it, but it definitely was not as quick and easy as a Talon or especially a Tachi. I've become very used to top loading a Tachi where you just press it down, and everybody's got their own preference. I might do a video on that someday as far as speed of reloading and wear and tear on the darts. Let me know in the comments if that's a video you'd actually like to see. But now we're ready to fire again. You get 12 shots in the magazine, plus you can keep one chambered, which means you can actually have 12 plus 1, 13 shots. Pretty darn good for a basic sidearm. I mean, my go-to previously was really the Dart Zone Pro Mk-II. Now they are different sizes and different form factors a little bit. This is definitely smaller and lighter, but with only 5 shots, they're not really in the same category. And as far as comfort, they're not in the same category. However, the Dart Zone Pro out of the box definitely beats it in terms of performance. However, the S200 is a more affordable blaster of the two of the blasters. So there are pros and cons here. I'd love to see this amped up to this performance level, getting it up to like the 130, even maybe 150. It's hard to say with this little plunger tube how possible that actually is, but I think it's something that can probably be done. And I'm probably unaware of what upgrade options are available for the blaster. One major caveat with this blaster is its profile. If you take off especially that little protruding barrel, this blaster very much looks like a real steel firearm. Now, I do understand it is clear and there's a little bit of red there, but this is not blaze orange. If we carry these, we will not be carrying them with this. I want this whole muzzle here to be bright orange and this barrel to be brighter. That's going to be my only condition. There's no way I can sell these in their current form. However, a lot of the fields we've been playing at, it's either private play. I can see if you're playing at an airsoft field or if you're playing in your house. Totally acceptable to have this blaster. I just don't think it's a great idea to bring this blaster in its current state to a public park, a school, or anything of that type. I even find this somewhat questionable. This is the Mk-II from Dart Zone, but at least this one's bright red with bright orange. It's a little bit better. This one, it really has a horrible profile for a toy, and so definitely keep that in mind if you do pick one of these up yourself. In the end, I'm gonna give this a solid 4 out of 5 stars. There's a few little quirks with this top slide. Not really sure what's going on there. And I'd love to see some different colors as far as an orange muzzle for US release. But other than that, really stellar offering. And I can't wait to see what this designer does next. I don't know if this is the same designer as the Swift, but clearly the design language is here. At the end of the day, I think the S200 Fire Rat is a really compelling offering. I believe this comes in at around $85. I'll correct myself on the screen if I'm wrong. Currently, I know you can get these from Monkey Mods, but we are in talks to hopefully carry them on the shop as well, because I was really impressed. And I will definitely be picking one of these up for the right field and the right gameplay, because I think it's going to make a terrific sidearm. Thank you so much for watching. I would love to hear your opinion on this blaster and what you think it looks like. Do you think it's something that should be at most games or just private games? If it was the right color, would that be more compelling to you? I think it's a really, really cool blaster, and I'm excited to get out and play with it some more. Until next time, I'm out of darts. At the end of the day, I think the SR200 SR, I keep wanting to add an R. Boop. At the end of the day, I think the SR, nope,